everyone, welcome to my channel. This is part 4 of the Verb Series. Today we will be covering high frequency action verbs. So let's get started. So what are high frequency action verbs? Simply put, these are the verbs you use every day. These verbs are used to describe actions, routines and interactions. Let's start with some examples and sentences to see how they work in real life. First up we have aller, which means to go. First example is je vais à l'école, which means I go to school. Repeat after me. Je vais à l'école. Next example is nous allons au parc, which means we are going to the park. Repeat after me. Nous allons au parc. Next verb is faire, which means to do or to make. First example is je fais mes devoirs, which means I do my homework. Repeat after me. Je fais mes devoirs. The next example is ils font un gâteau, which means they are making a cake. Repeat after me. Ils font un gâteau. The next example is prendre, which means to take. The first example is je prends un café, which means I'm having a coffee. Repeat after me. Je prends un café. The second example is elle prend le bus tous les matins. Repeat, which means she takes the bus every morning. Repeat after me. Elle prend le bus tous les matins. The next verb is venir, which means to come. The first example is je viens de Paris, which means I come from Paris. Repeat after me. Je viens de Paris. The second example is nous venons à la fête ce soir, which means we are coming to the party tonight. Repeat after me. Nous venons à la fête ce soir. The next verb is donner, which means to give. The first example is elle donne de l'argent à la charité, which means she gives money to charity. Repeat after me. Elle donne de l'argent à la charité. The second example is il donne des conseils à ses collègues, which means he gives advice to his colleagues. Repeat after me. Il donne des conseils à ses collègues. Next verb is dire, which means to say or to tell. The first example is je dis toujours la vérité, which means I always tell the truth. Repeat after me. Je dis toujours la vérité. The second example is ils disent que le film est intéressant, which means they say that the movie is interesting. Repeat after me. Ils disent que le film est intéressant. The next example is voir, which means to see. The first example is je vois un oiseau dans le jardin, which means I see a bird in the garden. Repeat after me. Je vois un oiseau dans le jardin. The second example is nous voyons un film ce soir, which means we are watching a film tonight. Repeat after me. Nous voyons un film ce soir. The next example is savoir, which means to know or to know how. The first example is je sais parler français, which means I know how to speak French. Repeat after me. Je sais parler français. The second example is elle sait où est la bibliothèque, which means she knows where the library is. Repeat after me. Elle sait où est la bibliothèque. Next verb is connaître, which means to know or to be familiar with. The first example is je connais bien cette ville, which means I know the city well. The second example is ils connaissent mes parents, which means they know my parents. Repeat after me. Ils connaissent mes parents. Next verb is manger, which means to eat. The first example is je mange une pomme, which means I'm eating an apple. Repeat after me. Je mange une pomme. The next example is nous mangeons à la maison ce soir, which means we are eating at home tonight. Repeat after me. Nous mangeons à la maison ce soir. The next example is boire, which means to drink. The first example is je bois de l'eau, which means I am drinking water. Repeat after me. Je bois de l'eau. The second one is elle boit du café le matin, which means she drinks coffee in the morning. Repeat after me. Elle boit du café le matin. So, before I go to the next verb, if you find this video useful, be sure to like and subscribe to this video. Next verb is se réveiller, which means to wake up. Je me réveille à 7 heures, which means I wake up at 7 o'clock. Repeat after me. Je me réveille à 7 heures. Next example is nous nous réveillons tout le dimanche, which means we wake up early on Sundays. Repeat after me. Nous nous réveillons tout le dimanche. Next example is se lever, which means to get up. Je me lève à 8 heures, which means I get up at 8 o'clock. Repeat after me. Je me lève à 8 heures. Next example is ils se lèvent avant le lever du soleil, which means they get up before sunrise. Repeat after me. Ils se lèvent avant le lever du soleil. Next verb is se laver, which means to wash. First example is je me lave les mains avant de manger, which means I wash my hands before eating. Repeat after me. Je me lave les mains avant de manger. Next example is elle se lave le visage le matin, which means she washes her face in the morning. Repeat after me. Elle se lave le visage le matin. Next verb is travailler, which means to work. First example is je travaille de 9 heures à 17 heures, which means I work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Second example is elle travaille dans un bureau, which means she works in an office. Repeat after me. Elle travaille dans un bureau. Next verb is étudier, which means to study. The first example is je étudie pour mon examen, which means I am studying for my exam. Repeat after me. Je étudie pour mon examen. Next example is ils étudient l'histoire à l'université, which means they study history at the university. Repeat after me. Ils étudient l'histoire à l'université. Next verb is jouer, which means to play. The first example is je joue au football avec mes amis, which means I play soccer with my friends. Repeat after me. Je joue au football avec mes amis. The second example is elle joue de la guitare tous les jours, which means she plays the guitar every day. Repeat after me. Elle joue de la guitare tous les jours. The next example is dormir, which means to sleep. The first example is je dors 8 heures chaque nuit, which means I sleep 8 hours every night. The second example, repeat after me. Je dors 8 heures chaque nuit. The second one is nous dormons dans une chambre confortable, which means we sleep in a comfortable room. Repeat after me. Nous dormons dans une chambre confortable. The next verb is parler, which means to talk or to speak. The example is je parle avec mes amis tous les jours, means I talk with my friends every day. Repeat after me. Je parle avec mes amis tous les jours. Next example is nous parlons français en classe, means we speak French in class. Repeat after me. Nous parlons français en classe. The next verb is écouter, which means to listen. The first example is j'écoute de la musique tous les soirs, which means I listen music every evening. Repeat after me. J'écoute de la musique tous les soirs. The second example is ils écoutent attentivement le professeur, means they listen carefully to the teacher. Repeat after me. Ils écoutent attentivement le professeur. Next verb is demander, which means to ask. The first example is je demande des informations à la réception, which means I ask for information at the reception. Repeat after me. Je demande des informations à la réception. The second example is elle demande l'heure à quelqu'un, which means she asks someone for the time. Repeat after me. Elle demande l'heure à quelqu'un. The next verb is répondre, which means to answer. The first example is je réponds à ton message, which means I am answering your message. Repeat after me. Je réponds à ton message. The second example is il répond toujours à la question, which means he always answers the question. Repeat after me. Il répond toujours à la question. The next verb is appeler, which means to call. The first example is je t'appelle ce soir, which means I'll call you tonight. The second example is elle appelle un taxi, which means she is calling a taxi. Repeat after me. Elle appelle un taxi. Next verb is aider, which means to help. The first example is je t'aide avec tes devoirs, which means I'm helping you with your homework. Repeat after me. Je t'aide avec tes devoirs. The second example is ils aident leurs parents à la maison, which means they help their parents at home. Repeat after me. Ils aident leurs parents à la maison. Next verb is marcher, which means to walk. The first example is je marche dans le parc tous les matins, which means I walk in the park every morning. Repeat after me. Je marche dans le parc tous les matins. The second example is ils marchent lentement sur la plage, which means they walk slowly on the beach. Repeat after me. Ils marchent lentement sur la plage. Next verb is courir, which means to run. The first example is je cours tous les matins pour rester en forme, which means I run every morning to stay fit. Repeat after me. Je cours tous les matins pour rester en forme. Next example is elle court vite pour attraper le bus, which means she runs quickly to catch the bus. Repeat after me. Elle court vite pour attraper le bus. Next example is entrer, which means to enter. The first example is je entre dans la salle de classe, which means I enter the classroom. Repeat after me. Je entre dans la salle de classe. Next example is ils entrent dans le bâtiment par la porte principale, which means they enter the building through the main door. Repeat after me. Ils entrent dans le bâtiment par la porte principale. Next verb is partir, which means to leave or to depart. The first example is je pars pour l'école à 8 heures, which means I leave for school at 8 o'clock. Repeat after me. Je pars pour l'école à 8 heures. The second example is ils partent en vacances demain, which means they are leaving for vacation tomorrow. Repeat after me. Ils partent en vacances demain. Next verb is quitter, which means to leave or to exit. The first example is elle quitte la maison très tôt le matin, which means she leaves the house very early in the morning. Repeat after me. Elle quitte la maison très tôt le matin. The second example is nous quittons le bureau à 18 heures, which means we leave the office at 6 p.m. Repeat after me. Nous quittons le bureau à 18 heures. The next verb is s'asseoir, which means to sit. The first example is je m'assois sur la chaise près de la fenêtre, which means I sit on the chair near the window. Repeat after me. Je m'assois sur la chaise près de la fenêtre. The next example is il s'assoit pour regarder le film, which means they sit down to watch the movie. Repeat after me. Il s'assoit pour regarder le film. Next example is se tenir debout, which means to stand. The first one is je me tiens debout pendant la réunion, which means I stand during the meeting. Repeat after me. Je me tiens debout pendant la réunion. The next example is il se tiennent debout devant la porte, which means they are standing in front of the door. Repeat after me. Ils se tiennent debout devant la porte. Next verb is ouvrir, which means to open. The first one is j'ouvre la fenêtre parce qu'il fait chaud, which means I open the window because it's hot. Repeat after me. J'ouvre la fenêtre parce qu'il fait chaud. The second example is elle ouvre son livre pour commencer à lire. Repeat, which means she opens her book to start reading. Repeat after me. Elle ouvre son livre pour commencer à lire. The next verb is fermer, which means to close. Je ferme la porte avant partir, which means I close the door before leaving. Repeat after me. Je ferme la porte avant partir. The next example is il ferme les fenêtres à cause du vent, which means they close the windows because of the wind. Repeat after me. Il ferme les fenêtres à cause du vent. The next verb is acheter, which means to buy. The first one is je vais acheter une nouvelle robe, which means I am going to buy a new dress. Repeat after me. Je vais acheter une nouvelle robe. The second one is nous achetons des fruits au marché, which means we are buying fruit to the market. Repeat after me. Nous achetons des fruits au marché. Next verb is vendre, which means to sell. The first one is il vend sa voiture, which means he is selling his car. Repeat after me. Il vend sa voiture. The next one is nous vendons les livres à la librairie, which means we are selling books at the bookstore. Repeat after me. Nous vendons les livres à la librairie. The next one is écrire, which means to write. The first one is j'ai écrit une lettre à mon ami, which means I am writing a letter to my friend. Repeat after me. J'ai écrit une lettre à mon ami. The second one is elle écrit dans son journal tous les soirs, which means she writes in her journal every evening. Repeat after me. Elle écrit dans son journal tous les soirs. Next one is lire, which means to read. The first one is je lis un livre intéressant, which means I am reading an interesting book. Repeat after me. Je lis un livre intéressant. The second one is nous lisons le journal chaque matin, which means we read the newspaper every morning. Repeat after me. Nous lisons le journal chaque matin. Next one is regarder, which means to watch or to look. The first one is je regarde la télévision chaque soir, which means I watch TV every evening. Repeat after me. Je regarde la télévision chaque soir. The second one is ils regardent un film au cinéma, which means they are watching a movie at the cinema. Repeat after me. Ils regardent un film au cinéma. So bye. See you in the next video, and be sure to like and subscribe if you find this video useful. Au revoir.